We all have influential people in our lives, and today's guest has been someone that has been extremely influential in my own professional development. I'm talking with Pieter Kroon, the founder of my fellowship program, the Manual Therapy Institute, where I got a lot of my start into good orthopedic manual physical therapy. So Pieter is originally from the Netherlands. He is a blast to talk to, just a great sense of humor and also a wealth of knowledge, as you'll see. So stay tuned for the episode. And if you like it, subscribe to the podcast so you get notified of our future episodes.
You're listening to the St. Louis Pain Expert Podcast with Dr. Dave Candy, St. Louis's leading expert in chronic pain relief. Dr. Candy specializes in helping women age 40 and above to overcome chronic nagging aches and pains without medication, injections, or surgery, so they can stay active, mobile, healthy, and independent. Whether you're suffering from pain yourself or know someone who is, pain's a universal experience that affects us all, but that doesn't mean you have to suffer. Knowledge is power, and having the right information can help you or someone you love get on the road to recovery. On the St. Louis Pain Expert Podcast, Dr. Candy talks with other pain experts from around the world to give you the information you need to recover, the peace of mind of knowing that you're not alone, and the hope that lasting relief from chronic pain is possible, and it doesn't require relying on pills, injections, or surgery in order to do so. So sit back, relax, and open your ears, mind, and heart, and let the healing begin.
Welcome to the St. Louis Pain Expert Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Dave Candy. I have with me here today a very special guest, Dr. Pieter Kroon, who is actually really influential in my development as a therapist. He owns a fellowship program and also a clinic down in Austin, Texas. So welcome, Pieter. It's a pleasure to have you here tonight.
Dave, thank you so much. It's been a while since we talked, so thank you for having me on. I'm slightly humbled, I have to say, so this is great.
Well, you've been just such a great mentor in my life, and it is good to reconnect and see all the wonderful things you're doing.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I went through your fellowship program at the Manual Therapy Institute, but you actually started your training back in the Netherlands, which is home for you, and then came out this way for further training in the U.S. Can you tell me about a little bit of your early development back in the Netherlands, and then what you did here in the U.S. and how that affects the way that you treat people today?
Yeah, so I graduated from physical therapy school in 1986 in the Netherlands, and at that time, physical therapy, it kind of is a completely different profession right now. There was not a whole lot of evidence-based therapies to go by, and inevitably that meant that the physical therapy was not fantastic in its efficacy. So I came to the States here because the unemployment rate of physical therapists in the Netherlands at that time in the mid-'80s was extremely high. It was about 70% or so. So, and in the US, there was a shortage of physical therapists, and heck, I was only 21. I'm going to go check it out. So I went to the States, came here, and had a chance to start my fellowship training in manual therapy with Mike Rogers in Gulfport, Mississippi. And so I did that in 1991. And that from a professional standpoint, it was the best decision I ever could have done. Finally, there was somebody that showed us how good orthopedic physical therapy should be done. And that was a rare thing at that time, and completely set me in the right direction of how we should develop as orthopedic physical therapists. Funnest thing I ever done in my life professionally up until I started this clinic. So Mike has been extremely influential in my professional career. And I moved back to Austin in 1992 and have been there since then with a few moves in between, short ones. Taught at Texas State at the orthopedic faculty for 7 years. And now I'm running Mondo Sports Therapy with Katie Gwynn, my business partner. And I run the Manual Therapy Institute, the fellowship program that Dave also went through with Tim Kuchowski. And so since then, orthopedic physical therapy has developed significantly. It's now a doctoring profession. And just to tell you how big of a step that is, when I graduated in 86, it was a certificate program. It wasn't even an academic degree awarded with that. So I truly have a certificate in physical therapy for my entry-level program, not even a bachelor's degree or something. So to go in 30 years from a certificate program with no academic background to a doctoring profession is a humongous step. And with the advent of evidence-based practice, which happened in the early 2000s, the manual therapists have been pretty much on the frontier of developing good evidence-based physical therapy for orthopedics. And the strides that we have made in treating certain problems are insane. So different profession, no doubt about it. More fun. We can fix more people. Thank God.
I would agree, and no small thanks to you in that for my own development.
Yeah.
Now, for someone who listening to this who may be unfamiliar with manual physical therapy, what it is, can you describe that in a brief couple sentences?
Yeah. So the shortest definition really is that manual therapy is orthopedic physical therapy done right. It is officially a subspecialty of orthopedic physical therapy. But really, if you look at the proper definition, is it's just orthopedic physical therapy the way it was supposed to be done, right? We always think that the most important thing that we can do as orthopedic physical therapists is problem solving. Can we figure out why the patient is in pain and why he's coming to see you? A good example we always say is, hey, if we get a runner with Achilles tendon problems coming in on the left side, you cannot just say, yeah, you're running too many miles, because you cannot run 70 miles a week and expect that Achilles tendon to survive. There is a little bit of that, of course, but the right uninvolved leg runs just as many miles as the left involved leg. So why is it the left leg where the Achilles tendon breaks down, but not the right leg under the same amount of mileage? So that kind of problem solving, that is what we're all about, right? After that, you got to be able to fix a few things. So you got to be able to move a few joints when they're stuck, or you got to stabilize a few joints if they're moving too much. Then you got to be able to treat tendon tissue versus muscle versus cartilage, if that's where the damage is, because that's completely different. You got to be able to treat chronic pain properly, because that is a whole different ballgame altogether. And we've gotten quite good at that over the last 10 years. And then patient communication is huge as well, because what we found is that healthcare literacy is a little bit of a problem. Patients frequently don't have a very good idea what is going on with them, despite the fact that they've been seen by many different physicians, practitioners that are trying to help them out. We think it's extremely important that they know what the problem is, what they're coming to see us for, because that prevents a lot of frustration on the provider's part, but also on the patient's part. So the patient communication and health literacy is a hugely important problem. Now, all that combined, that is what makes a good manual therapist, is what we believe.
Well, I guess that's a vast difference from give me a few stretches from that in your certificate program.
Yeah, and of course, we still get that, of course, because I get it in my own family too, where they say, hey, Peter, and they point at their elbow and they go, my elbow hurts. You got some stretches for that? And, you know, it depends on my mood of the day, but usually the answer is no, right? But people still think that is what physical therapists do, right? Our professional identity is still that we rub the sore spot and then stretch a little bit. So, yeah, we've come a long way from those days. There is no doubt about it. Yeah.
So in your practice now, you see a lot of runners and endurance athletes. What are some of the most common running injuries that you see?
Yeah, so the most common running problems that we see are tendon related. So hamstring tendon, Achilles tendon, and then problems with what we call the tarsal tunnel. It's on the inside of the ankle. So with the flexor hallucis longus or the posterior tibialis. Those are very common. We see a lot of plantar heel pain, which is commonly referred to as plantar fasciitis, but I believe we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about that in just a second. We see a lot of those problems. We deal a fair bit with bone stress injuries, and then, believe it or not, back problems are extremely common in the running population for a variety of reasons that we can go into if you would like to do that. But yeah, we see a lot of back problems and hip problems.
Well, so you mentioned tendon injuries. Why are those so common in runners?
So we see them more common in the master athlete population, so runners in their 40s, 50s. And what is happening as we get a little older, the load-bearing tolerance of the tendons decreases a little bit, and we by and large believe that the tendon problems mostly occur due to a lack of strength, basically, right? Because when we get into our 40s and our 50s, we cannot just run anymore. That is the problem, right? And but we see that runners like to run. They don't like to do additional ancillary training to keep their bodies as strong as they possibly can be to withstand the pounding that comes with running 40, 50 miles a week, right? And because most people, they have jobs, family lives, then you want to run a fair bit of miles. And if that is all you do, eventually you are going to break down, because the problem a little bit is that every step you take in running, it's 3 times your body weight ground reactive forces. So in my case, 600 pounds, right? So you do 1,000 steps in a mile, you're on 20 miles a week, that's 20,000 steps, 600 pounds of ground reactive forces. If the musculotendinous system is not well developed to withstand that, eventually that'll break down. And that is where the tendon problem comes in. And usually what we hear is people have no clue how that happened. They say, I just did an easy workout, wasn't even that strenuous, and all of a sudden my Achilles tendon started to hurt, right? So it is usually the straw that breaks the camel's back. So it's something that has been lurking underneath the surface for a longer period of time. And there's a couple of contributing factors to that. Number one is really, we truly believe, a lack of strength, right? Then there's training errors. It's the rule of twos: too much, too fast, too soon, that type of stuff, right? And then there is the other issue of underlying biomechanical faults. So if the joints are restricted in that area, or if there's an underlying muscle imbalance where some of the muscles are working too hard, other ones are not doing enough of the job, then certain structures can become stress risers and eventually will break down, right? And that is the fun part for us, by the way, because that is where our problem solving comes in, is to see what are the underlying biomechanical factors that contribute to, for example, the Achilles tendon becoming a stress riser, right? But the rule of twos is an important one, because endurance athletes are good at that, doing too much, too fast, too soon, with not enough recovery. That is a very common issue.
So it's not the 5 mile easy workout. It's the 205 mile workouts before that caused it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then not enough rest. Oh, yeah.
Now, what are some of those training error factors that you mentioned besides the too much, too fast, too soon?
Yeah, that is usually where that comes down to, right? And what we also see often is that people don't take enough rest, right? So not enough sleep or not enough time in between races. And that we see not infrequently with marathon runners that want to run more than 2 marathons in a year. If you're a true competitive athlete, that might work. But for a weekend warrior, and that also includes the people that qualify for Boston, which is the holy grail of amateur marathon running, 2 marathons a year is a lot already, right? Because it takes about 6 months to prepare for a race. And you need to kind of periodize that to where there's enough rest time in between so your body can recover a little bit, right? And because that only goes well for so long. So besides doing too many miles, too soon, too fast, it's also not enough recovery, not enough strength training on top of that to make sure that you stay in the proper shape from a strength and load bearing tolerance with the bones and the tendons. And that is usually what that comes down to.
So a couple of specific tendon injuries, you talked about the IT band and hip problems, and that's sometimes actually referred to as runner's knee. Why does that happen?
So IT band problems, so pain on the outside of either the hip or the knee, are commonly seen issues, not just in runners, by the way. We see them rather often in people that are fairly inactive too. And we believe that is due to a muscle imbalance, usually in the hip, sometimes driven by problems in the foot, right? So you have to kind of assess both. The problem a little bit is if the hip stabilizers are not strong enough, every step you take, the thigh and the knee will fall into a deduction. So it veers in and it turns in. And the problem then is that you overstress the IT band a little bit. Now, the IT band is not contractile tissue, so you cannot stretch it out. It is basically the tendon structure for the glute maximus, the biggest hip muscle. And there is one muscle that keeps that tendon sheath under the right amount of tension during walking, running, and that has a tendency to work too hard, and that will put too much tension on that IT band, and that hurts. Now, contrary to common belief, you cannot outstretch that, right? That is not how it works, and that is, my God, I cannot tell you how many IT band stretches I've given to patients back in the day, how much soft tissue work I've done, and I always thought, oh, it's because we don't stretch the right stretch. So we came up with the strangest stretches for the IT bands, but the thing is that thing has the consistency of a leather belt. You cannot stretch it out. That it doesn't work that way. So you got to address it differently. You got to strengthen the muscles that are deficient, and then you got to shut up the muscles that are working too hard. So it usually comes down to strengthening the lateral hip stabilizers, and that includes the glute medius mostly. And then you also want to make sure that the hip joint moves appropriately, because if the hip joint is a little restricted in its motion, that can give problems with that. And that is you and my job, right? We mobilize or manipulate that. And then you also got to address underlying foot issues, because people that have problems with what we call pes plano valgus, so flat feet, basically where the foot is a little bit too loosey-goosey and there's no arch in it, they have a tendency to fall with their knee into interrotation and adduction in the stance phase as well, and that leads to overloading of that IT band. It's a totally fixable problem, by the way, but what doesn't work is a lot of soft tissue work, rolling with the foam roll, and IT band stretching. That is not where it's at. And I'm not just saying that. I did it for 20 years, right? So all the stuff that we're making fun of right now, that is stuff that I've done for years back in the day. It just doesn't work. You don't fix anybody with that. Makes sense, right?
It does, which is probably why that's perceived as such a chronic problem, because you do the things that everyone says you should do for it, and a lot of times it doesn't get better.
Exactly. Yeah, that is, and it is the most frustrating thing ever, because when you Google that stuff, that's the first thing that pops up, and a little bit the problem with those things, and we're going to talk about that with the plantar fascia issues as well. It sounds so damn plausible, right? You look at it, you go, exactly, that is my problem. That is what it feels tight. I need to stretch it, and if I roll it because it's sore, that's probably going to work better. And then you roll a little bit harder, because if a little bit is good, a lot is probably better. And if it hurts a lot, then it must be doing something good. Yeah, that's how you do my physical therapy too. If it didn't hurt a little bit, I probably didn't do a whole lot for him. And I have done a complete 180 on that one, because nowadays I think, if it hurts, I'm overloading the tissue that is injured. So that is not where it's at, but it sounds so damn plausible. That is the problem.
It's kind of undoing that old no pain, no gain mindset.
Yeah. Oh my goodness gracious. And that is a hard one to get rid of. There is no doubt about it. Even in our profession, that's a hard one to get rid of. Not just if you're as an athlete try to figure it out on your own. A little bit the problem, right? When you Google solutions, there's a lot of good, but there's also so much bad information that looks good. And the problem is, of course, there's no referee that tells you this is bad or this is good. It's just out there, and people are just trying stuff. Yeah.
So you mentioned the pes planus valgus when you're talking about IT band syndrome, and that is probably a good segue into the plantar fasciitis.
Yeah.
Can you describe what plantar fasciitis is in its literal sense, and then what it really kind of is most of the time?
Yeah. So plantar fasciitis is basically heel pain caused by an affliction of the plantar fascia. It is, in essence, the improper name, because the term itis indicates an inflammatory response, right? So, and what they found with those problems is that there is very little inflammation. What the problem is that the plantar fascia is breaking down at the insertion on the heel bone. Now, the plantar fascia is the structure that spans the arch of the foot like a bowstring. So it is a major stabilizer of the foot as you're landing on it while you walk and run, right? Because again, we talked about it previously, is that when you walk and run, the ground reactive force on the foot are 3 times your body weight, which is significant. So the foot tries to absorb those shocks by a threefold mechanism. One is the bony architecture of the foot. So there's arches in the foot on the inside, the outside, and then across. And that in and by itself, that arch structure makes it for a very stable platform. Then you have the ligamentous structure that keeps all those bones together. And the plantar fascia is the main stabilizer for the arch of the foot. And then you have the muscles that provide the active stability. That is as simple as we can make it. And what happens sometimes is that if there's too much stress on the plantar fascia, for whatever reason the case may be, the insertion where it grows into the bone can break down. And it is a literal breakdown of the fibers of the plantar fascia. And that is what's causing the pain. So the term itis is not a good name for it because, again, it implies an inflammatory response as the prime driver of the pain, and that is not the case. We think words matter. So if you call it plantar fasciitis, that automatically puts your brain in the direction that we need to treat this as an inflammatory lesion. So then you're going to use stuff like ice massage and anti-inflammatory medication. So Advil or ibuprofen over the counter. And again, a lot of stretching. And that is just not the right approach. And a lot of soft tissue work on that. And again, much like the IT band, I cannot tell you how many plantar fascias I've soft tissued, stretched, rolled with the Coke bottle, put ice on, never made them any better, right? So now here is a little bit the problem because those heel pain patients tend to have problems for a very long period of time. Part of that is improper problem solving. And part of it is it's related to the nature of the problem. And so we need to talk about that a little bit. And let's talk about the problem solving first. Not all plantar heel pains are created equal. There are 4 main differential diagnoses that need to be figured out. One is the plantar fascia can be a problem. The second one is that there's a little nerve that runs right by the insertion of the plantar fascia. It's called the first branch of the lateral plantar nerve. It's a mouthful. That can become irritated. Then there can be a fat pad problem, right? Because when you poke at the bottom of your heel, you feel squishy tissue, and that is the fat pad, and that functions as a natural shock absorber, and it's good. That is where you want a lot of fat, right? You don't want to be skinny there. And then the other one that needs to be ruled out is that there can be bone stress or stress fracture of the heel bone itself, which is basically the precursor of a fracture. Now, the most common problems are indeed the plantar fascia itself, but a close second is the nerve irritation over there. And that is where we think things are going wrong because the vast majority of diagnosis that we get in there is still plantar fasciitis. It is never, they hardly ever look at the nerve as the underlying problem. Well, if you don't diagnose it properly and you treat the plantar fascia or the heel pain as a plantar fascia problem and it's a nerve issue, it's like driving in Chicago with a road map of Detroit, which, by the way, I have done with Tim. I mean, I think I told you that story when you were in my program in Vegas. That truly has happened. You're not going anywhere. And it's the same thing with this. If you don't make the proper diagnosis, you're going to apply the wrong treatment to it. And that is one of the reasons why those things just take forever to get better. Now, the other reason why things take a long time to get better is that the plantar fascia is in essence tendon tissue. It is the same consistency, it's the same ground substance, the same collagen fibers. So the treatment for the true plantar fascia problems is the way we treat tendon problems. And we know from the latest research over the last 5 to 7 years from mainly Jill Cook and her compatriots is that a good tendon healing program takes about 4 to 6 months before things are said and done. So even if you do the right thing at the right time, right from the word get-go, a true plantar fascia problem is still going to take 4 to 6 months to fix. But they do fix, right? Now, if you misdiagnose it and you get what we frequently get, because like I said, we don't market a whole lot. So we get a lot of patients that have been seen by everybody and their brother, and they finally come through the door after they've been seen for like 3-4 different therapists, doctors and all that stuff. And I just had one coming in this week, 2-year history of plantar heel pain, 6 cortisone injections, still not better, still could not walk more than half a mile. And so we took a look at it, and that was truly a case of raging nerve irritation, and nobody ever addressed it. But the problem a little bit is when you have a chronic nerve problem like that, is that the nerve sheath changes its consistency and becomes more vulnerable to mechanical deformation. And basically what that means is that the nerve stays cranky, right? It's really easy to flare it up, and it's really hard to settle it down. And those things, even if you do the right thing, will probably at that point, when it's become that chronic, it's probably going to take 6 to 12 months before everything is said and done. But having said that, if you do the right thing, it will get better. It's just not today. And that is a hard thing for people to swallow, because everybody wants the quick fix. And there are no quick fixes. There's fixes, things get better, right? Because if all things are equal, that stuff will fix. But they have to bear with us, and it's with a lot of up and downs, right? So the progress is a little bit up, down, but incrementally, week by week, it should arc towards progress, right? So, and that is why we think those problems tend to be a little chronic, right? And it's not just runners that get plantar heel pain, right? It's people with sedentary positions and that are being a little bit overweight. They also get plantar fascia problems, right? So then the question becomes, what the heck is up with that? Because they don't load their plantar fascia a whole lot. For those people, we think because high body mass index is a risk factor for plantar heel pain. And we think in those cases, a lot of times it is the underlying biomechanical fault in the hind foot, the ankle, right? Because it's most of the time they come in with pain in one ankle, right? And not the other one. Well, they weigh 260 pounds on both ankles, not just on one, right? So there's something else besides the high body mass index that drives that. And that makes sense, right? So, and we see a fair bit of that stuff. And again, there is a lot of misinformation on how to treat that properly. And it's not about stretching the plantar fascia. It really is not, right? Because the plantar fascia is not contractile tissue. So how can it be short, right? Because stretching is fine if something measures short, but you cannot measure a plantar fascia short or long. It is what it is. It doesn't just get short because it gets irritated, right? So stretching has some benefit, but not for the reason that it lengthens the tissue, right? There's another reason for that. Makes sense, right? And rolling over the Coke bottle doesn't work. Same as foam rolling for IT bends doesn't work. Yeah.
So some common, other common treatments with plantar fasciitis, we'll call it just for the sake of conversation.
Sure.
Corticosteroids and orthotics. What are the pros? What are the cons?
Yeah. So the corticosteroids, you have to be a little careful with that because there are some risks involved with it. Number one is that when you apply the corticosteroid injection, it will kind of, in essence, melt down the fat pad of the heel, right? Because that's one of the side effects that it does. So it decreases the shock absorption capability of the fat pad of the heel. Now, the other one is that it temporarily decreases the tensile strength of the plantar fascia, and that can lead to a rupture of the plantar fascia, right? So then, so you go from the frying pan into the fire with that type of stuff. Now, having said that, we still do it. We still refer them out for that at times when we have a really against the grain plantar heel pain that we cannot get a handle on, but that it's the exception rather than the rule, right? So there is that. The other thing about the orthotics is that most of the time the orthotics, the evidence shows that it's neither here or there, right? The vast majority of people with any type of foot problems don't need orthotics. 80% of the people are just fine. It's the 10% on the loosey-goosey end with the flat feet, and then the other 10% on the flip side that have the really high arches where the foot becomes really stiff. Those people need orthotics, right? Now, having said that, I've taped people with plantar heel pain, right, where it's really acute to see if a little bit of support will help. And if they get some relief out of it, we say, yeah, wear some over-the-counter orthotics for a little while, right? But don't spend your money right away on custom orthotics. They're very expensive and might not be as much bang for your buck as what you think, right? And I get it because we hear that a lot where people say, do I need different shoes? Do I need orthotics? Because again, it's the quick fix and buying new shoes is fun, right? But we usually say, hey, it's not the shoe that is the problem in the majority of the cases. It's the foot in the shoe that is the problem, right? So there's that.
Yeah, being married to a marathon runner, anytime an injury comes about, it's always new shoes.
Yep, absolutely. And I get it. I've been there. I get it. It has to be the shoe, right? Cannot possibly mean me. I totally understand that, right? Sometimes it is. The majority of the times, it is not.
Just like the bed for back pain and the pillow for neck pain.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very true.
How about barefoot running? This has also kind of been a topic, more so in running communities.
Yeah. So for a while, the whole barefoot running movement was about 5 to 7 years ago, where that was here in Austin, at least, was becoming really popular. There was a book, was called Born to Run. I always associated with Bruce Springsteen's album, but now I'm old, of course. But this was a book that was written about a tribe in Mexico that basically ran bare feet the whole time and never had any foot problems, right? So the idea was that barefoot running engages your foot muscles more. It promotes more of a midfoot strike. So in essence, better running, leading to less problems. Yeah, there's absolutely that, because barefoot running does, make your midfoot muscles work a lot harder. And that is a huge problem in the running population, is that foot strength is not good in most people. And that is because we have a sedentary lifestyle most of the time. We're not on our feet a whole lot. And then we always wear really good protective shoes. And that takes some of the function of the foot muscles out of the way. There is no doubt about it. So they figured that if you run barefoot, all life is good, right? So there's a couple of things that we want to say about that. And the first thing is we are very good friends with a somewhat well-known running coach by the name of Gilbert Tuhadonye, who came from Burundi, fled the civil war over there, was a Division I runner here in Texas, and highly acclaimed. Now he writes, he speaks, he's an insanely motivational man to be around, very good running coach. And we had a long conversation about the use and misuse of the barefoot running. And he always laughed. He goes, yeah, Peter, when I grew up in Burundi, we ran barefoot too. And he goes, but you know why that was? We had no money for shoes. And he said, you know what, the first thing I did is when I came to the States to run on scholarship, he goes, got myself shoes. He says, shoes rule, right? So, and then the other thing is, to be really good at what you do, you try to emulate what the experts in your profession, sport do, right? If you want to be a good basketball player, you look at LeBron James and see how he plays his game. When I wanted to be a really good physical therapist, I moved my butt to Gulf War, Mississippi. Well, I don't want to offend anybody, but Gulf War, Mississippi in the early 90s was not the hotbed of an active life as I saw it, right? But I knew that was the place for me to learn good orthopedic physical therapy. So I went to learn from Mike Rogers because he was the best at our profession at that time. That's who I learned from. And it's the same with running. So when I look at the elite runners, marathon, middle distance, sprinting, who runs barefoot? Nobody. They all wear shoes or spikes. The last person that ran at an Olympic level barefoot was Zola Butt in the 1988 Olympics. She was the last one to ever do it, and from South Africa. And after that, nobody did. So if that is what we see, I wonder, if the elite runners don't run barefoot, why would I do that as a weekend warrior, right? And then the other thing is, I'm also a 200-pound runner, right? Those people that he wrote the book about, they are an Indian tribe in the highlands of Mexico. There's no 200-pound runners there. They're all tiny people, right? So their ground reactive forces are significantly different. They have calluses on their feet. We don't have calluses on our feet. And there's rocks and glass and this and that on the road. It just doesn't work. We saw a lot of people having injuries coming out with that one, right? So we think it's a good thing in moderation. If you want to do barefoot running once, twice a week, do it on the grass after you're done with your run, right? do some strides, do some bounding, run across the field barefoot, and just make it part and parcel of your ancillary training, because it is good for midfoot strength development. But it is not something that you need to run the majority of your miles on when you're preparing for your marathon, right? Because we're not used to that type of stuff, and things go wrong, right? So I think it's one of those other things. We are a fad-driven society, and in a way it was a bit of a fad that got overblown, but there are some good kernels of truth to it. So as much, it's like with a lot of the other stuff we see, use it in moderation, life is good.
Well, you've shared a lot of good knowledge today. If someone wanted to get a hold of you at your practice in Texas, how would they reach you?
They can always email me. And the best way to do it is just email me at the clinic. It is Pieter, Pieter, at mondosportstherapy.com. That is probably the easiest way to do it. And I'm very good at answering emails, right? It might not happen like right at that moment, but within 24 hours, you get an answer. Absolutely true.
Oh, very good. For someone who's listening to this today, what takeaway thoughts or closing messages would you like to leave with someone?
So I think the closing messages for the stuff that we covered, right, is that despite the chronicity of the problems that we talked about, IT band issues, tendon problems, plantar heel pain problems, there is fixes. Those things do fix, right? Because we are living tissue, and there's no reason to believe, if we don't do the right thing, that things cannot get better with the right approach, the right therapy. And that should work. But also keep in mind, there's no quick fixes. They don't exist, right? Because that's snake oil. There's fixes, but some of the fixes just take a little bit. And most of the running-related problems and the chronic issue that we talked about have been building up for a very long time. And then one minor incident just started breaks the camel's back. But to reverse something that has been building up over months of time cannot be undone in 1 or 2 visits. But things will fix, right? And then the other thing is we say you need to stay strong, right? The stronger you are, the larger the margin of error and the least amount of problems you will have, right? And that usually, and the research is pretty clear on that one, because there never used to be any good research on how to do with master athletes, because there weren't a whole lot. When I was growing up, if you're 50, you're old. Well, I'm 57. And that's also old, but I still want to do a lot of stuff, right? So there was not a whole lot of research available, but it's getting there. And what the consensus is that we stay relatively injury-free by getting stronger. You have to lift a little bit of weights, and body weight is usually not enough. You need to get your booty in the gym and start lifting some iron once, twice a week. And it doesn't have to mean that you're there for 2 hours, like Dave, who's a power lifter, right? Who can lift more weights than I can ever dream of, right? That is not what we're talking about, unless that is what you want to do, because it's also fun, of course. But to stay in decent shape, where you build a larger margin of error, you can get in now in a good workout in about good 40 minutes or so. Once, twice a week, it makes a humongous difference, truly.
Well, thanks so much, Pieter. It was good to catch up with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. That was a lot of fun, and I sure appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. That truly was a lot of fun. I hope you were able to gain even just a fraction of the information from Pieter that I was over the few years that I was in his program. We just covered the fact that there was so much misinformation out there, and a lot of times it seems very plausible, and when you look on the internet, it's the first thing that pops up. So I wanted to inform you of another opportunity that I have coming up here in the next week if you're listening to this live. On Wednesday, June 16th at 5 p.m. Central Time, I'll be holding a webinar about how to relieve sciatic nerve pain at home. It's going to cover 3 common false beliefs about sciatic nerve pain, 3 things that you can do to get some relief without spending tons of extra time stretching, and the number 1 thing to do to keep the pain from coming back in the future. So I hope you join me on Wednesday, June 16th. The link to register is how-to.relievesciaticnervepain.com. How to, all one word, .relievesciaticnervepain, all one word.com. If you're listening to this on a replay and you don't catch the live webinar, there will be a link to the replay in the show notes as well. Thanks again for listening, and have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the St. Louis Pain Expert Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you live in the St. Louis area and would like Dr. Candy's help to find a solution to your pain, visit our website at stlpainexpert.com. Email Dr. Candy at dave@stlpainexpert.com or call Dr. Candy's clinical practice at 314-941-3970. If you're listening from outside the St. Louis area but would still like some help, feel free to contact us to learn more about our virtual health coaching. Regardless of where you live, please share our podcast with anyone you know who would benefit from learning more about pain and what can be done to relieve it. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or your other favorite podcast platform so you get notified when we release a new episode. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you'll enjoy us again soon.